This episode of New Politics was released on the 18th of October, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
The Labor government backs down on superannuation reforms. We've got real corruption going on with the Prime Minister becoming the president of a lobby group in Canberra. The continuing defamation case of Linda Reynolds. And a ceasefire in Gaza, but how long will it last? I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
The Labor government has made the decision to water down its own superannuation reforms, and it's a retreat from something that wasn't such a big reform in the first place, but at least it would have shown that they're starting to get serious about changing the tax system to make it a lot fairer than it currently is, and they've just failed to take that first step. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, says the revised plan still raises a substantial amount of money, and here's what the Treasurer said during the week about this.
Well, first of all, when it comes to the feedback that we've had for more than 2 years now, you know, the objective there has been to separate the genuine feedback from the usual kind of predictable partisan, feedback that you get from time to time. You know, as Treasurer and as a government, we always try and take feedback seriously. You know, we always try and find the best way through. We always try and work through issues in a considered and a methodical way. And that's what's happened here. You know, we found another way to satisfy the same objectives. It means a fairer superannuation system from top to bottom. It means better outcome for people on the lowest incomes and better targeted concessions for people with the biggest balances. And that's a good outcome from our point of view.
The original policy doubled the tax on superannuation earnings to 30% for balances above $3 million. And it's not a radical change, but at least it would have been a step towards fairness in a system that's geared towards the more well-off people. And Chalmers' new version indexes the $3 million balance, and it lifts the tax to 40% for balances over $10 million. And this is a concession worth around $700 million to the top 0.5% of superannuation accounts. And that's around 90,000 people that it will affect or influence. And instead of raising $2.7 billion, it will now raise $2 billion. And the new plan will come into effect a year later than planned. So I think this is what the message is. When powerful people make a lot of noise, this government backs down. And this is the party which is supposedly the party of reform. Well, this is how they handle reform. It just gives up. And this seems to be a recurring theme with this government. Major changes are needed from a government that should be all about courage and conviction, but then it goes off and does the opposite. And if this government doesn't carry through with such a minor reform, well, there's not much hope in making the real big changes that are required.
There's an argument I read from Tim Dunlop where he basically said the centre, he's not the only one who said this, but taking a centrist position means things will always move to the right. And that's pretty much true. It allows the Liberal Party to claim a victory. Poor performers like Tim Wilson, one of the worst performers we've ever had in Parliament, can claim a victory because he'd started that fear campaign on franking credits, which affected more big companies. One of those big companies then went into voluntary bankruptcy, Dick Smith, because the guy who owned the brand could see that he could bankrupt and sell it off and make a profit at the cost of hundreds and hundreds of jobs. Now, that was during a Liberal government and a particularly poor Liberal government, so we'd expect that they'd do nothing. The superannuation thing is quite strange because people were convinced that their superannuation was going to be affected, even though it was for superannuation accounts worth more than $3 million. The average super account, and this is where super has been a disaster, the privates tried to take it over and couldn't. And then we moved into the gig economy where super becomes hard to manage. But the average super amount is something like $100,000. There are 8 people with more than $100 million in super. That's got to be some kind of rort. Why would you lock $100 million up in mostly conservatively performing investment portfolios? Because they might be self-managed funds. I don't have that level of detail. But you can't touch it till you're 67. So you're either over 67 and living off an incredibly good return each year, or you're avoiding tax in some other way. And this is why they're frightened of over $3 million. And again, it's hardly anybody. And it does seem to me that the Treasurer was overruled because he was pushing it only 3 days before. And then the next thing, we've watered it down. It was a good plan. And again, superannuation shouldn't be hidey holes for investors. Superannuation should be a financial plan that when you get to retirement age, you may not need to be reliant on the pension. The more I look at it, the more I think we should just have a universal pension. 65 or even 60, you're eligible. This will ease the job market a bit. This will take it's very hard to get work after you're 50. You don't have to retire if you're in a business, or if you're in your own business, or if you're a contractor or something.
Or a successful podcaster.
You can keep working. But they've set the superannuation fund up so that it benefits the ultra wealthy at the expense of the everyday person. Now, I know that if you work in superannuation and you're a funds manager or something, I know that you'll be saying, I don't do that. And I'm not blaming, that's God's work and keep going to it and you have my full support. But at the top end, it can be fiddled to not make you comfortable, but to make you wealthy or to protect vast wealth. And that's not really what it should be about. It should be about spreading the wealth, giving people a sense of security so when they can't work or when they're too tired to work because they've been working for 40 or 50 years and they've had enough, you can go away and live comfortably, maybe frugally, but certainly in such a way that you're not a burden on your family, on your friends, etc.
Oh, for sure. But the opposition to Labor's proposed changes, that all came from all the usual suspects, the wealthy, the lobbyists, the industry groups, and they were all just rolling out that same fear campaign. We end up getting all of those stories about the cash poor farmers and retirees that would be forced to sell their homes just to pay the tax. And when it was all assessed and worked out, well, it didn't really amount to very much tax to be paid at all by those individuals. It would have raised a certain amount for the government, but for those individuals, it wasn't actually that much tax that was going to be paid. But the reform itself would have only affected less than 0.5% of all Australians, or at least people that have got superannuation accounts. And you'd think that if you've got that amount of assets in your superannuation account, that you're probably not doing too badly. And if you've got a farm in your superannuation account, well, what's that doing there anyway? It's probably some kind of tax dodge. And I think most people would probably see this as a simple question of fairness and equity. And instead of standing its ground, well, the Labor government just buckled to the slightest amount of pressure, and they ended up making a political decision and not an economic decision. And I think that it continues to show that despite the large majority that this Labor government has got, it's still a fearful and cautious government. And it's not so much about the superannuation issue itself. It's about how Labor responds to political pressure and where that political pressure come from. And usually if it's from the business elites, or it's the world class or powerful people, the government just rolls over and acquiesces. And if these sorts of vested interests can derail this very, very small, tiny, minuscule issue, well, how can the government ever deal with the bigger issues like housing, like climate change, or the big tax reforms that have to be made to make the system a lot fairer? And I think it also sends out that message that whenever there's a prospect of any sort of reform, well, these same people will appear from different. It might be different faces, but it'll be the same sort of people from different vested interest groups and industry, and they'll force the government to backtrack and retreat, and then nothing ends up being done.
Rothschild, the banker, said the time to buy is when the blood is running in the streets, and this is what they're after. They want that continual chaos so they can buy it up. And then when it does settle down, sell at a profit. The whole argument of farmers have to sell the farm. If the farm is part of the superannuation package, it's insanity. They'd be better to do those reverse mortgages, I suspect. And again, people worried they've got $10,000 in their superannuation account and they're worried they're going to lose half of it in tax. They should be more worried about building that $10,000 up to something that can give you at least an adjunct to the pension. It's just insane. And I know we harp on this, but the media...
Every week, David.
Every week, The media doesn't. No, there are some segments of the media that does, but generally the media falls into line and says, yes, this is a terrible thing, and isn't it good of whomever that they brought this up? Or they don't say anything, just let it go out there unchallenged and say, oh, we're being fair. But if it's something they don't like, they bring in some absolute lunatic for, inverted commas, balance, close inverted commas. When I'm king, things are changing. Don't sit there complacently, people. You'll be affected.
And also, well, this is related to the issue, but Paul Keating, former Prime Minister Paul Keating, came out during the week with a message to Anthony Albanese. Well, not specifically, but I guess that's who the message would have been directed towards, that you have to use your political capital when you have it, when you've got that political capital. And Anthony Albanese seems to be doing the opposite of this. He just keeps hoarding it or wasting it on the wrong things. And it's like he's just too afraid to offend the markets. He's too afraid to offend the donors and the media, of course, and anyone else. He's just too afraid to offend anyone else who was going to complain about all or any of these issues. And these are the same people who are never going to be the ones to back the Labor Party when it comes to election time. And I think, this is a key point. You have to use that power when you've got it. You can't use it when you haven't got it. And you just have a look at the Hawke-Keating government. They totally reshaped Australia. They built Medicare, or rebuilt Medicare. They redefined the modern Labor Party. And sure, that wasn't to everyone's liking, but the point is that they didn't waste their time in office in the 1980s and early 1990s. And the issue at the moment is that there's just all of these big ideas just waiting to be fixed up and dealt with, ending this blind belief in this idea that the markets will fix everything. There's negative gearing and capital gains tax. There's genuine housing reform that has to be made, genuine social security reform, treating housing as a human right, cancelling AUKUS, that's the biggest and dodgiest deal in Australia's history, reforming higher education, which is a complete mess at the moment. So these are just some things that we can think of at the top of our head. And after 3.5 years in office, and the Albanese government is likely to have, the Labor government is likely to have another 5 years or more based on everything that we can see politically at the moment. Well, that will be 8.5 years, maybe 9 years. What's the point of being in government if you're just going to be a long-term government without actually doing very much at all? And if we look at the same point of the Howard government, so that would have been the late 1990s, 1999, verging on 2000, they were on the verge of introducing the GST. They privatised essential services in health, in aged care, and early childhood education. They reshaped the economy to make it fit around corporations. Now, a lot of this was bad news, but they still did it because it fitted in with their ideological agenda, and they got really, really busy with all of that. And just thinking this through, maybe this is all that we can hope for within modern government. When the Liberal Party is in office, they make all the radical right-wing reforms. And then when the Labor Party is in office, instead of reversing those changes and introducing some big picture progressive reforms, they just slow down the change that the Liberal Party has introduced so it doesn't happen as quickly. And all of this just ends up being a holding pattern. And it's pretty depressing if that's the best that we can hope for.
Anthony Albanese has said his aim is to transform the Labor Party into the natural party of government. That worries me. His aim should be to make the Labor Party the great reforming party, which it was. Chiefly,
and it is possible to do both if we have a look at history.
Oh, yeah.
Be a long-term government and a reforming government.
Yeah. I get that as a politician, you want to stay on the Treasury side of Parliament for as long as you can. The pay is better. You actually get to do things. Being in opposition is miserable. So if you look at the great reformist governments from Labor, where you have the Fisher government, you have Curtin reforms as philosophically, I think, rather than he's got a water fight. The implications of the war he fought reverberate for decades. Chifley totally restructures the economy. And when Menzies gets in, he doesn't actually do a lot to change. All he really does is stop the nationalisation of the banks in 1949 and tries to ban the Communist Party. Apart from that, it was really what Chifley had brought in that Menzies keeps going. And stopping the nationalisation of banks was a disaster. We are now in this field where banks are profit machines. They're not the community's economic hub anymore. They are built for shareholders, not customers, despite what their advertising tells you. They're built for the wealthy, not the poor. The Commonwealth Bank, part of its idea was that poorer people could get loans to start up businesses, to buy homes, to buy the burgeoning motor car, to make their life a bit easier, because it was protected by the Australian government. And so a bad loan could be managed through. Now they're giving out bad loans in the hope that the government might bail them out if we have another 2008 recession. I'd have thought that if I was a Labor Prime Minister, I would have been more inclined to be grouped in with people like Fisher, like Chifley, like Hawke and Keating, like Rudd to a lesser extent, rather than to be lumped in with a whole range of non-performing Liberal governments that were just happy to be in power, who thought that they deserved power merely for who they were, not because what they did. And now is the time to burn political capital. You can learn from John Howard. All his unpopular decisions till the last term, all his unpopular decisions came in the middle of his terms. He'd spend 18 months making the change and then 18 months making people forget he'd made the change. Hello, John Howard, if you're listening. Don't expect that level of concession all the time. But that's how he did it. And that's how he wasn't a terribly popular Prime Minister. But he didn't have to be. He just had to be popular enough. Incredibly popular Prime Ministers like Hawke, like Rudd, don't last. Hawke did, admittedly, third longest running Prime Minister, but held on to his popularity, didn't really. At the end, he was less interested in those reforms than he was in being loved by the people. Keating was never terribly popular. Again, he was just popular enough, but like Hawke, made massive changes. Whitlam was wildly popular, then he wasn't. But again, he changed Australia forever. And they keep trying to change it back, and they can't. They keep trying. Australia is, thanks to Whitlam, is a multicultural, well-educated, relatively wealthy country.
But I guess ultimately for a political leader, it's not about being popular. It's about doing the right thing in government. It's about the performance. And Albanese at the moment he's not actually a popular Prime Minister. His government has got a massive majority and won the 2025 election by a landslide. But he himself is not popular, and that's not the important thing. That's why we keep suggesting pretty much every week, just get on with it, do what you got to do, and the politics will look after itself in the long term.
Exactly. Mark Latham said you only need one more vote than the other side. He gets elected by one vote, I think. He's elected as Labor leader.
And our ratings always go down a little bit when we mention Mark Latham.
Yep. So I'll try and think of someone else. The thing is, you only have to win by one, and then you can consolidate, you can build, but if you're perceived to do nothing, I know that there's a lot that the Labor government has achieved, but they seem to be timid in promoting it. They seem to be timid in letting the public know that they've done this, and that's a problem. It's one thing to be the natural party of government. It's another thing to show people why you should be. And that's part of the problem. They're just not showing what they've done in any real and substantial way. And the election campaign will run around and they'll try and do it there, but it won't stick. Now, they're not going to lose the next election, but you'd think you'd try and maintain as many seats as you possibly can. And it's only going to take a small shift in the right side of politics and they're in trouble again. So you'd be hoping that Patterson and Hastie and those far-right figures will keep undermining their own side.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis, the best podcast on Australian politics and news commentary. You can support us through Patreon and Substack, and also find us at newpolitics.com.au.
What's even crazier is that the president of the Parliamentary Sports Club is the Prime Minister, which puts him in a very awkward position as he's effectively the president of a lobbying firm, which I think most Australians would have concerns about, and seems really nuts that it's set up this way. After raising concerns about this privately and also publicly, the club has decided not to tell these lobbyists that they can't come, not to stop taking money from companies and rather focus on what sport is and can be about here at Parliament. But instead, they've kicked me out of the club. They've told me that I can't be a member and am not welcome to attend fixtures operated by the club. I guess it goes to show how normalised the influence of people like the gambling industry has become in this place when you raise questions about that rather than dealing with what seems like a big issue. To me and a lot of people I speak to, you get booted from the Parliamentary Sports Club.
During the week, we had a new low in political absurdity, or a new high, depending on which way you look at it, where the Australian Parliamentary Sports Club in Canberra, and that's the group that organises those friendly football games between politicians, journalists and lobbyists, well, it turned out to be an official registered lobby group, and the president of this club is none other than Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Now, this club has been around for 30 years, but only registered itself as a lobby group in late September. So, for a short period, David, we had the Prime Minister as the president of a lobby group that could actually lobby the Prime Minister. And when this issue was revealed by Senator David Pocock and then reported in Crikey, the Attorney General's Department quietly removed the listing of the sports club from the lobbying register, hoping that nobody would notice. But we did notice it. And I think this is just the perfect example of how cosy the political culture in Canberra really is. A sports club funded by lobbyists, where journalists, politicians, their staffers and the lobbyists, of course, they can supposedly have a bit of harmless fun while they're networking, making deals. But David, this is not harmless fun. This is at the heart of corruption. And then the sports club said that it wasn't really a lobby group, it wasn't a lobbyist, even though they went through that whole process of registering themselves as a lobbyist. And the Prime Minister just laughed this off and said, oh, this is just all part of the gig. And I think this is what the problem is. Corruption in Australia isn't always about the brown paper bags filled with cash and then submitted to or sent over to the politicians. It's none of that sort of stuff. It's about access, it's about privilege and the quiet deals that are done on the football field. And I think this just needs to stop.
It shows the insidious nature of the gambling lobby. As you said, there's no harm in the politicians getting together and playing sport. We have quite a number of ex-professional and have had quite a number of ex-professional politicians in Parliament. Hubert Opperman was a cyclist. Nova Peris-Kneebone was a runner. Glenn Lazarus was a footballer. And I'll be missing people here. You had people like Bob Hawke and David Fairbairn. I should mention Ali France too, who was in the Paralympics. But you had people like...
There's also Zali Steggall.
Zali Steggall. Yes, I knew I'd miss important people. But you had people who played sport at a very high level, at an amateur level too. David Fairbairn,
Corey Bernardi, good friends.
Tony Abbott, Bob Hawke. So it makes sense that to blow off a bit of steam, to just see your political friends and opponents in a different context. Yeah, we'll go out and we'll play football, or we'll play, I don't know what sports they played, but they did that.
And then bet on the game itself, see who wins.
Yes, and this is where it is. I had a personal encounter with how insidious the betting industry or the gambling industry can be. I was at a function the other day. I was doing sound for a grand final lunch, in case those of you who have gathered things about me were going to ask, what are you doing at a grand final lunch? I was being paid. And the table I was sitting next to a guy who worked for one of the big foreign gambling companies. And his job was to go to these things and sign up punters. And yeah, he basically said Wednesday through to Sundays, he was at that type of function, particularly when you got to the racing season and the grand final seasons and the cricket season. So really from April through till about February, I think. And I thought, this is really insidious. One, why do we have foreign gambling companies here? The money just pours away overseas. And I should say too, for those of you who enjoy a punt, who control how much you spend, who are in it just for a bit of fun, you make a bit of money, you might lose a bit of money, but I don't really have a problem with that. But these companies make their fortune from those who have a problem. And so they need to be much better regulated. They need to be taken out of public discourse. So that if you want to go and you bet on the horses every week and you put your $50 down, and some weeks you win it back and some weeks you don't, but it's enjoyment, again, no problem, not a problem at all. But for those people who have to do it, who, if they don't get that endorphin rush, can't function properly, and who turn to crime to fund it, who lose their house, who lose their livelihood because they can't control themselves. These are the people we should be protecting. That they register as and as far as I know, the story hasn't come out, but that they register as a lobby group in Parliament suggests to me that it was another way of the gambling industry sneaking in the back door of politics. And as you said, the conflict of interest of the Prime Minister being the chair of a lobby group is the only precedent I can vaguely think of, and God knows what Morrison did, but that's a whole other mess for another time. But Alfred Deakin used to write articles for one of the English newspapers about the Australian government as an anonymous insider's view, in which he would criticise the Deakin government's decisions. Lenore's, his biographer, says that the only people who knew this would happen would be Deakin and possibly his tax agent, who would have put in the income he made from this. But whether the tax agent knew what he was being paid for or not is a whole other story.
Oh, well, that to me seems to be more like a stunt more than anything else. But to me, this seems quite radically different. How can politicians justify belonging to a club that's paid for by those industries that they're then supposed to be regulating? We talked about regulation before, and the other thing is that when David Pocock pointed this anomaly out, he actually got expelled from that sports club and he was booted out, and that's because
one of the professional sportsmen, as was pointed out.
That's right, and
we don't want that type in our sports club.
Exactly, but it's also, well, it just shows that it's not really a social club or a place to play sport or social sport. It's a network of power, and it's similar to that issue that we talked about last week with the National Press Club. Politicians, lobbyists, journalists, all schmoozing, all supported by the gambling industry, by the fossil fuel industries and the defence industries as well. Probably a similar situation with this Parliamentary Sports Club. Similar sort of situation, and then when it gets exposed, it's all sort of brushed off. And the CEO of that parliamentary club, the Parliamentary Sports Club, Andy Turnbull, he said that they only registered as a lobby group out of caution. And you're thinking, well, what sort of caution are you talking about there? But something like this should be referred to the National Anti-Corruption Commission, but it won't be referred because that's as broken as everything else is.
It is stunning how close the Albanese government is to the Morrison government in certain ways. Which government would I prefer? Well, the Albanese government, because they at least try and point in the right direction. But you see this type of stuff and you think, how did this happen? How do we have the NACC, which ticked the KPI box, but has not been, it's like the Timu Anti-Corruption Commission, the one you ordered from the International Court of Justice and the one you ordered from Timu or Alibaba. Just ridiculous.
And I'm not accusing anyone of actually doing the corruption, no. but just the opportunity for corruption is quite large. And we're gradually seeing what all of these different social clubs and sports clubs and press clubs are all about. They're all fronts for the lobbying industry. The National Press Club, that's all about lobbying. The Midwinter Ball, that's supposedly all about raising money for charity. But all of these are networking and access opportunities. And to me, this is what corruption looks like in modern democracies. For all of these social clubs, it's all about deals and networking, the lobbying with social events on the side or sports on the side, whether that's a social football game, a speech at the National Press Club or the Midwinter Ball. Their core business of all of these institutions is the lobbying, and everything else they do is just the front.
The Midwinter Ball with the glamour shots of particularly friendly journalists. You note that they don't have hard-hitting journalists turn up to this thing. They don't want awkward questions. They want soft journalists underarm bowlers, if you like.
I'm sure the serious journalists or the hard-hitting journalists turn up to something like the Midwinter Ball, but they're not there to ask the questions anyway. But it's just this whole schmoozing process of all. Yeah. It's the lobbyists, it's the journalists, it's the politicians, it's all the staffers. It's a networking opportunity. It's got nothing to do with speeches or talking about journalism or charity ball or sports games. It's all about the lobbying.
It's completely wrong and broken. Some of the best political journalists never interviewed a prime minister or a leader of the opposition. And they did that because they didn't want to get to know them too well. Because if they did something that required hard-hitting journalism or uncovered corruption or something, they didn't want to get to know them terribly well. And I know that we do have hard-hitting journalism from time to time, and we have hard interviews from time to time. But we've got to get that separation, that it's not people who know each other. Oh, I saw you last night at the ball. How did you enjoy it? Oh, good. Now, about your reforms to the tax system, tell us about that brown paper bag of money. Surely everybody does that.
Well, the whole process just ends up being normalised, and I think that's what the issue is.
Yeah, and that's it. We should be calling out poor behaviour. We should be calling out good behaviour too. If it's good policy, if it's working, yes, praise the government. No, not praise the government, but give the government proper credit. If it's not working though, we've got to hammer them, even if we broadly agree with that government. You don't want to be friends at all. You just don't. You want to make sure that in journalism, you're part of that essential checks and balances, which includes the courts, which includes the public service, which includes corruption bodies, which includes elections. If we don't have checks and balances all the way, we've got nothing.
Former Senator Linda Reynolds has taken her long-running legal battle with Brittany Higgins to a new level, where she's now filing bankruptcy proceedings in the federal court. And this follows Reynolds' previous win in the defamation court, where the court ordered Brittany Higgins to pay more than $300,000 in damages, plus interest, and 80% of Linda Reynolds' legal costs. And the total bill for that could reach $1 million. And this is all based around an Instagram post from 2023 where Brittany Higgins accused Reynolds of mishandling her rape allegation in 2019 and waging a campaign of harassment against her. And based on what we're seeing, I think that's probably absolutely correct. And the court ruled that the Instagram post from 2023, well, that was defamatory, and this judgment is more than likely going to leave Brittany Higgins and her husband David Shiraz in financial ruin. And Linda Reynolds has said that she's taking this right on through until the end, and that's her legal right to do that if that's what she wants to do. But I just think that it shows her to be a pretty vindictive person, very thin-skinned for a politician, and it just shows that there's a lot of problems within Australia's defamation laws to be used in this particular way. But this whole case, it's not about the money or the reputation, it's all about power, and it's all about how one bitter and vindictive person wants to rewrite the history of one of the biggest scandals in Australian politics.
I don't know what reputation she's trying to protect, because it seems to me that since this has started, she hasn't covered herself in glory. She destroyed evidence, got that lounge cleaned. She, from what we can tell, she did not handle the aftermath very well. Certainly HR people and IR people I know have said that's not how you do it. You support your staff. Now, I know that there are those out there who think that Brittany Higgins is lying for some reason, and they point to the rather large payout she got. But that went through the courts. That went through the courts and was tested. And there was nothing dodgy about it, unlike the last, and you'll know more about this than I do, Eddie, more about Western Australian politics. But I think Linda Reynolds should have stopped. Once she won that case, she should have stopped. I believe that Brittany Higgins and David Shiraz had to sell the house they'd bought in the south of France to start again. You'd think that would be enough. Like, you'd think her moving out of the country would be satisfactory to Linda Reynolds and her supporters. She's gone. She won't be back. But she keeps chasing her. She has to sell the house, move back to Australia, and now you want to bankrupt it. This is a woman who has gone through an incredibly traumatic experience.
Oh, and Linda Reynolds has said that this entire court process was to protect her reputation, as you mentioned before. But here's a reminder of the sort of reputation that she's trying to protect.
Do you agree with the sentiment that that flexibility in wages and keeping wages at a relatively modest level is a deliberate feature of our economic architecture to actually drive jobs growth?
Yeah. No, I don't believe. No, absolutely not. And for Bill Shorten to even suggest that, I think it shows a fundamental lack
I'm actually quoting
economics.
I'm quoting Matthias Cormann, the finance minister here, Minister, your colleague. He says that wages flexibility is quite a deliberate feature of our economic architecture.
But he's absolutely right.
And David, I think I can remember Linda Reynolds saying that Brittany Higgins is a lying cow as well. And I thought that's doing greater reputational damage by saying those sorts of things. But I think that Linda Reynolds is just going to keep going for more and more and more and more, because people like this just do not know when to stop. And the other issue is that there's that power imbalance within this whole setup that exists. There's Linda Reynolds as the Defence Minister at the time, and Brittany Higgins as a young political staffer. I think she was 22 or 23 or something like that. And maybe Brittany Higgins should have looked at the history of the Liberal Party to see how they treat women as well. That's one issue. There's also the weaponisation of defamation law. And I don't know if we're going to end up being sued for defamation or not, David, but let's see how it goes. But there's a weakness in the law, I think, that Linda Reynolds wins this case. We also had the Peter Dutton situation of using defamation laws when he was accused of being a rape apologist. Bruce Lerman had the defamation case thrown out of court because he was accused of rape and sexual assault, and he actually lost that case. And we have to remember that Justice Michael Lee did say that on the balance of probabilities, Bruce Lerman did rape Brittany Higgins. And under Australia's defamation laws, someone can still be defamed even if what is said about them is actually true. So it seems like there are problems within Australia's defamation laws, but Linda Reynolds just also seems to be quite a vexatious litigant, or allegedly a vexatious litigant. And if these laws didn't exist in the defamation field, she'd probably try and use some other laws to get back at Brittany Higgins.
I had a defamation lawyer once tell me that it's actually very hard to defame a politician. In the course of a politician's job, they are being called all kinds of names and accused of all kinds of things all the time. And part of being a politician is that your reputation does get damaged, if only by the other side. People don't understand the limits of the job that you do, and so they get upset that you didn't maybe do enough on something that wasn't in your jurisdiction or your legislature. People vote for the other side and make sure that you know that they know it, and they also make sure that you know how they feel about people who are on the other side to them politically. Death threats all the time, or not all the time in Australia, but a politician, a career politician particularly, is a lifetime of being defamed. And so as a politician, you're going to have to expect people are going to say things. Now, there are some things that a politician can defend themselves about. If, for example, you're being accused of running the pedophile ring and you haven't, and that type of thing might go in front of a defamation court, or even that's been weakened in the last few years. If you're accused of being a drug importer or something, major crimes that aren't true, you could potentially sue for that. Even then, you generally don't get the money goes to a charity of your choice because it doesn't look right to be profiting from the court. I don't know what's happening to the money that Linda Reynolds is winning. I can't imagine that it's going to charity, but I don't know.
I think we've got Linda Reynolds just on the phone.
Oh, great. Hello, Linda. How are you? I say that in jest, of course. So to push it even further, to push to bankruptcy, which will ruin Linda Reynolds' reputation further, improve Brittany Higgins, her supporters are now galvanised. It seems to me that either Linda Reynolds is getting very bad advice legally, or she's ignoring very good advice, and in the end, the lawyers have just gone for it because they may as well. The longer you stretch the elastic band, though, it either snaps back or it breaks. Neither is a good outcome if you're the one doing the stretching.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
But the momentous breakthrough that we're here to celebrate tonight is more than the end of the war in Gaza. It's with God's help, it'll be the new beginning for an entire beautiful Middle East. From this moment forward, we can build a region that's strong and stable and prosperous and united in rejecting the path of terror once and for all. I want to express my tremendous gratitude to the Arab and Muslim nations who helped make this incredible breakthrough possible. And you really did.
There is a ceasefire in Gaza at the moment, and the United States President Donald Trump's latest declaration that the Gaza ceasefire marks a great day for the Muslim and Arab world isn't so much an act of diplomacy, it's pretty much political performance art. And there's no question, David, that having a ceasefire is better than the continuous dropping of bombs that we've seen over the past 2 years, but it's the same stuff that was seen before. There's photo opportunities that are dressed up as peace when the opposite is the case. And this plan that Trump and Netanyahu have concocted, it doesn't actually end the war. There's no legal basis or declaration of this. It just seems to be a pause at the moment. And there was a 20-point ultimatum that was handed to Hamas where the choice was pretty simple: comply with this plan or be annihilated. And there's been the release and exchange of hostages, and it's always forgotten that Israel actually has thousands of Palestinian hostages as well. But all of this is skirting around the real issues of justice, reconstruction, and Palestinian sovereignty. And these are the issues that will have to be resolved. And just going back to the way that things were before October the 7th in 2023, well, that isn't good enough. And I think we just have to keep reiterating that it is good that people are not being killed, but mainly not being killed, but there's just so many unresolved issues. And I think there's some clues in the way that Benjamin Netanyahu just accepted this deal so quickly, because if it actually comes to full fruition, it's like he's signing his own political death warrant, because his political future depends on perpetual conflict, and a real and a just peace would pretty much end his political career and probably result in a one-way trip to the International Criminal Court over at The Hague. And I don't think we're seeing a massive breakthrough. And I guess the killing has stopped for the time being. And again, that's a good thing. But it just seems to be another act in a political performance that's been put on by the United States and by Israel over the past 80 years. And you can't have that illusion of diplomacy and that belief that you can continue to occupy people and oppress them so severely and still call it peace.
We're seeing the last, I hope will be the last desperate actions of a desperate and corrupt man. A man who needs the war to keep himself from being arrested, although the suggestions coming out of the Middle East is that it's not enough anymore. The Trump deal, which was actually a deal brokered by Biden last year, but held off by Netanyahu so that Trump could get the credit, probably in that failed attempt to get him the peace prize. It is backfired. Apparently the minor Israeli parties have done a deal that Netanyahu will not hold power after the next election, that those that hate each other would rather work with each other. And Netanyahu is being booed, and his name is being booed right throughout Israel. He's lost his legitimacy. Should have lost it 30 years ago, but he has now gone too far that he can be considered a viable and genuine leader for the future of the Middle East. Of course, if America is the one pole holding Israel up in the Middle East, if America withdraws its support, which at this stage isn't likely, but a week is a long time in politics, anything can happen. I think we've got to keep our eye on this very carefully, because the whole world order may be changing.
And it doesn't seem like too much has changed over the past few days within Gaza itself. Israel is still pulling all the strings. It's halved the amount of aid trucks that should be coming in each day, which was in the agreement, and I think it was 600 trucks a day in the agreement they've reduced it down to 300. And because they said that one of the dead hostages wasn't returned, they said that it wasn't actually one of the hostages. We don't know if this is true or not, because Israel can just say whatever it wants and use that as an excuse to break the ceasefire. So that's a bit of a holding issue at the moment. It's also killed 7 Palestinians on one day during the week after the ceasefire had been agreed to, because these people were in a zone that they weren't meant to be in, even though on the ground, well, no one really knows where these lines of the different zones begin or where they end. There's also a secret clause within this agreement that allows Israel to keep bombing if that's what they decide to do. And it also seems like, just getting back to Israeli politics, which you referred to before, it just seems like there's this bipartisan dependency on conflict within Israeli politics, and that's all parties pretty much. They're all just too dependent on conflict to ever accept a real peace with Palestinians, whether that's Netanyahu or someone else. And there were all those leaders signing the deal in Egypt during the week without any Palestinian presence, of course. That seems to be the way that things are done at the moment. And when you've got a dominant participant in the region whose interests are best served by continuing with this conflict, there's just not much hope for a long-term peace.
No, they don't want a long-term peace, because war gives them legitimacy, and it gives them a reason to do what they want to do, which is eliminate. Netanyahu's said this. He wants to eliminate the Palestinian people, get them out of Gaza, let Trump open his Trump Tower on the Gaza Strip and get hold of that gas and the oil in the Gulf there. And of course, the stupid thing is that we're heading to the end of gas and oil. The most they can hope for is 50 years. Now, Netanyahu will be long gone by then. Probably so will I. But it's such short-sighted thinking. And the other thing too, which I don't think gets said enough, the level of racism towards Palestinians and the level of Islamophobia has been incredible. They have allowed things to happen without thinking of the human cost. It was only till we saw the pictures of starving babies that people started to think, oh, maybe this is a bad thing. Before then, it was the fog of war. It's too complex to understand. The Middle East is a very complex place, even though to those watching carefully, it was one-sided. All racism is bad. Anti-Semitism is bad. And of course, the Palestinians are Semites, but so are a lot of the Jewish people. And it is bad to disparage someone solely on the grounds of their race, religious background, or cultural beliefs. We can argue those beliefs. That's perfectly fine. But one of us is not any better than any other of us when it gets down to it. But we've been allowed to think, and this isn't you or I, of course, or any of our listeners, but we've been allowed to think that somehow it's okay to bomb Muslim people in the Middle East, where it's not okay to argue against the bombing of it.
Well, that's the continuing conundrum, I guess, but also the full scale of Israel's brutality in Gaza is finally visible to the world. There was a Swiss journalist who was taken to Gaza, and when he saw what was going on there, he just said, humanity has been destroyed here. And he also said that Israel needs to open up Gaza to foreign journalists to see exactly what was happening there. And it's almost an extension of what you were saying before, David, that even though this has all been sent out to the world by Palestinian journalists, there's a tendency in the West to not believe what's happening in there because it's coming from Palestinian journalists. So we've got to send in the foreign journalists to make sure that what's going on there is actually, as reported by Palestinian journalists, is actually correct. So I guess that's a separate issue. But if Israel keeps telling the world that they've got the most moral army in the world, well, that's what they should do. They should just open it up to all the foreign journalists, and the rest of the world can see what they've actually done there. But the point is that I think we've already seen most of it anyway. Entire neighbourhoods have been erased, hospitals, schools and universities, they've all been destroyed. There's almost 70,000 civilians that have been killed officially, although there was a suggestion from Francesca Albanese from the United Nations that this figure could be closer to 680,000 people. I know the medical journal Lancet has actually suggested it might be around 250,000 people, but whatever the case is, this is a massive amount of people. And we've already seen all of this happening. We've seen it through social media. We've seen it on television as well. And once you see that, it's almost impossible to unsee it. And I think that the global awareness of this issue has actually gone way ahead of Israel's ability to control the narrative, and might also be the first real turning point in Western policy since 1948, and it's primarily because Israel has just gone too far. We've talked about this so many times over the past couple of months. Israel has gone too far, and it is essential that all the killing has stopped or it's slowed down. That's the first part, but just because there's a ceasefire, it's not the end of it, and you cannot have real peace without having justice attached to this process as well. And Israel has to be held accountable. So does Benjamin Netanyahu. Talked about this so many times before, David. There has to be sanctions and isolation. And when we first talked about this 2 years ago, it was seen as a bit of a fringe issue, but now it's mainstream. And a lot more people are now asking, well, why does the world never apply the same standards to Israel on all of these sort of things? Why is there so much influence by the state of Israel in so many countries around the world? And when you're getting people in the United States, people like Joe Rogan asking these sort of questions, or Charlie Kirk until he was shot a few weeks ago, or Tucker Carlson, other people then start asking the same questions. And then we've got the situation where Palestinians are returning to their homes, even if they're just going back to rubble. Well, it shows that Palestine exists. And I think that illusion of Israel as a good actor in the region, well, that's gone. That's smashed, and that's not going to come back. And it might take a while for that illusion to be smashed for good, but it's just going to be hard for Israel to go back to where it was before. And I think the rest of the world is now starting to wake up to all of this.
They need another Rabin who worked towards peace and paid dearly for it. I think one of the issues is that the right in America, or segments of the right in America, some realised, I'll be fair here, some would have realised, hold on, no, this is wrong, a genocide is wrong. We fought in World War II against this type of thing. Even when we didn't know that's what we were fighting against, it became clear by the end of the war that one of the things was to stop this happening. There's that element of the right. There have been some columnists who've gone through and thought, wait, no, this is wrong. And now we've seen the starvation. Now we've seen what's happened. Now we've seen properly how Netanyahu behaves. This goes against our principles of individualism and free market and entrepreneurship and basically free living. Liberty living. If America pulls its support, and in an American right-wing field which has a number of people who don't want America involved in the Middle East at all, who argue everything America needs can be made within the boundaries of America, and that when America involves itself in foreign wars, all it does is cost American lives for not much benefit. It is possible that America will pull its support of Israel in the shorter term rather than the longer term, particularly if Netanyahu gets arrested. And then things will happen. What? I don't know, but things will happen. The other thing to remember too, we are watching the decline of the American empire, and we're watching it in real time, and we're watching it quickly. I said a few weeks back that Trump is a catalyst or a symptom rather than the cause. But in a sense, that doesn't matter. The fact is that it's happening and we're watching it happen. And the world is going to be a very different place in 2035, I think.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.